All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Opine Dine, a free 14-session virtual panel series brought to you by the Maryland Human Trafficking Task Force's Public Awareness Subcommittee. My name is Ashton Petta, and I'll be your moderator this evening. I'm the Human Trafficking Prevention Manager for Howard County Government, and I'm honored to be guiding our conversation. From our first session on human trafficking in HT 101, we dived into more specific topics within the umbrella of human trafficking, such as grooming, child sex trafficking, and child sexual abuse material. Tonight's session is the fourth in the series, and we're going to be focused on labor trafficking. We have an incredible group of experts with us, and I'll introduce them in just a moment. And before we get started, just a quick housekeeping items that we want to address. This session is being recorded for the first 55 minutes so that it can be shared with those who are unable to attend live. If you prefer not to appear in the recording, please keep your camera off and avoid unmuting during the recorded portion. The recording will end before our Q&A session. So if you're able to ask questions freely during the final portion of the session without being recorded. So that's going to be sort of for privacy purposes and just for sensitivity for some topics and questions that folks may have. And to remember to please keep your microphone muted unless you're speaking. The chat is open throughout the session, so feel free to introduce yourself, share resources, submit questions for our panelists. We will have some wonderful tech support and chat monitors with us to make sure that all questions are addressed or can be addressed later. Our chat monitor, Danielle Thomas, will be collecting questions and we'll be bringing them up for discussion for the audience Q&A portion around 6:55 p.m. And if you are experiencing technical difficulties and you can try leaving and coming back or send a message in the chat. We'll do our best to assist. We'll still be able to add you and admit you if you're having internet issues or you need to leave and come back for any portion. And at any point of this session tonight, if a conversation or a topic feels difficult, please know that there is support and assistance and help available. There is the National Human Trafficking Hotline that you can contact at 888-373-7888, as well as their crisis line. You can text home or help to 233-733. And if you would like additional local resources where you are, we can help get you connected to that as well if you feel more comfortable with local resources. And we encourage engagement throughout the panel. Again, we really encourage folks to utilize the chat if you want to share thoughts, resources, respond to different discussion prompts. We just simply ask that all comments remain respectful, that they're on topic and considerate of diverse experiences and perspectives of everyone participating. So now we're going to introduce our panelists. We're very, very lucky today to have an incredible group. First, I'd love to introduce Celine Moria. She is the anti-trafficking coordinator at the International Rescue Committee, also known as IRC, in Silver Spring, Maryland. She specializes in human trafficking identification, response, and prevention with a focus on high-risk populations, survivor-centered service delivery, and cross-sector collaboration. Her expertise is informed by frontline case management, program coordination, and community engagement, and she regularly delivers training and technical assistance to multidisciplinary audiences on best practices for identifying and responding to human trafficking. She holds a master's degree in ethics, peace, and human rights from American University in Washington, D.C., with a concentration in victim advocacy and the prevention of child and forced marriage. She is a certified human trafficking prevention consultant through the U.S. Institute of Diplomacy and Human Rights and a certified victim advocate through the Maryland Victim Assistance Academy. Drawing on both direct service and systems level expertise, Celine provides practical, evidence-informed training and strengthens professional capacity, enhances multidisciplinary collaboration, and improves outcomes for survivors of human trafficking. I'm always blown away at everyone's bios. This is incredible. Thank you so much for being here, Celine. We have Evelyn Chumbo, who is the Director of Advocacy and Survivor Leadership at the Human Trafficking Legal Center. She is a survivor of child labor trafficking and has dedicated her life to ending modern slavery. She was brought to the United States from Cameroon at a young age and was forced into domestic servitude before escaping and helping assist with the sentencing of her trafficker to receive a 17-year prison sentence. Today, Ms. Chumbo works as an anti-trafficking activist and speaker, advocating for survivor employment opportunities and challenging systemic racism within the movement. She has briefed the Department of Homeland Security, FBI, State Department, Department of Justice, and served on President Obama's Council on Human Trafficking. Her honors include the 2021 Abolitionist Award in recognition in StoryCorps Voices of Freedom Initiative. Currently, Ms. Chumbo serves on the board of the Human Trafficking Legal Center and Free the Slaves and continues pro bono human trafficking advocacy work at Baker and McKenzie in Washington, D.C. And I'm sure we'll also discuss her Harriet Tubman Fellowship later as well. We have Karen Dayhoff, who is, she serves as the Senior Youth Services Coordinator at Asalee Women's Enterprise, AWE, where she oversees a program for immigrant youth impacted by labor trafficking, sex trafficking, and other forms of exploitation. Her work focuses on trauma-informed care, survivor leadership, cross-sector collaboration, and expanding access to critical services for vulnerable immigrant communities. Karen has extensive expertise managing funding initiatives, developing community partnerships, and advocating for protections for trafficking survivors. She is fluent in Spanish and has dedicated her career to supporting immigrant youth and families. In Baltimore, Karen serves as the co-chair for the Victim Services Subcommittee and the Baltimore City Human Trafficking Collaborative, and was appointed by the mayor in 2026 to be a member of the Baltimore City Trauma-Informed Care Task Force. We have Elizabeth Holt with us tonight, and she is a public service venture fund legal fellow at the Centro de los Derechos del Migrante, or known as CDM, from 2025 to 2026. Isabel graduated from Harvard Law School with the goal of becoming a migrant labor rights lawyer. After graduating from law school, Isabel clerked for 2 years at the New Hampshire Supreme Court. She has worked as a student attorney at the International Human Rights Clinic and the Harvard Immigration and Refugee Clinic, examining labor conditions from a transnational perspective. As a legal fellow with CDM, Isabel is especially committed to supporting workers who have experienced gender-based discrimination and harassment while working on temporary visas in the United States. And we have Ricardo Ortiz, who is the campaign strategist at CDM, where he develops advocacy campaigns that build worker power across the United States and Mexico and advance justice for migrant and immigrant workers. He has worked alongside migrant and immigrant workers in industries including seafood, agriculture, construction, restaurants, domestic work, and the traveling carnival and fair industry. He partners with workers to provide labor rights education, support organizing efforts, and connect them with the resources that they need to protect their rights. His work is rooted in building trust with workers and strengthening their ability to advocate for themselves and their communities. Before joining CDM, he was a political reporter in Mexico, where he covered the Mexican Senate, national elections, and presidential press conferences. I am so impressed already, and I have a million questions for each and every one of y'all. So thank y'all so much for being here, and I thank you so much for the work that you do in this field. So let's get started. So just kind of off the jump, Ricardo, this question is going to come to you first. So if you could define for everyone here, so what is labor trafficking, and how does it intersect with your work?
Thank you, everyone. And I think my colleague Isabel will take the lead on this answer, but happy to continue the conversation.
Yes, thanks so much. And I'm sure Ricardo will jump in and tell me what I've missed. Yeah, so I'm an attorney, and when I think about labor trafficking, I think about the law, because that's where my training takes me. But kind of at its most basic level, labor trafficking is about exploitation and it's about control. And it happens when an employer, a recruiter, or another person uses economic coercion, threats, deception, or abuse of power to prevent someone from leaving employment or to compel them to continue working under exploitative conditions. And this can take many different forms, including debt bondage, threats of deportation or immigration consequences, withholding wages or documents, physical or psychological abuse, or threats against workers and their families. So we meet a lot of workers who are experiencing a range of abuses, and we seek not only to identify potential trafficking situations, but also to build trust with workers, to educate them about their rights, to support their organizing efforts, and to help create conditions where workers can speak about exploitation without fear. And so many workers who are vulnerable to labor trafficking are extremely isolated. They're afraid of retaliation, and they're often unaware of their rights. This is especially true in our context, working with temporary migrant workers whose immigration status is tied to a single employer and who may depend on that employer for not only their job, but also their housing, their transportation, their access to information, and their ability to stay legally within the United States. So as you might imagine, these conditions can create a very significant power imbalance, which makes it much harder for workers to speak out or seek help. And the primary way that we enforce labor trafficking violations in the United States is through a law that's called the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, or the TVPA. This is a federal law that allows people who have experienced trafficking to sue their traffickers in federal court, and also allows for both civil and criminal prosecutions for violations. And there are, many benefits of this law. It has a very long statute of limitations and it covers a really broad range of remedies. But it's also incredibly complicated. And workers can realistically only access justice if they're able to find an attorney to represent them. And the unfortunate reality is that there are more workers who are in need of assistance bringing trafficking cases than there are attorneys who are able to bring them. And then additionally, as I think most of you know, litigation is a very protracted process and it can take years to resolve a case. So, yeah, in terms of how labor trafficking intersects with our work, we frequently get calls through our intake line from workers who have experienced some form of coercion at work, depending on where the worker was at the time they experienced the trafficking facts. We refer some of these cases out to trusted partners across the United States, and other ones we develop on our own into litigation. For example, we are currently representing a worker in a labor trafficking case who experienced trafficking while he was working on an agricultural visa in North Carolina. And right before this call, that is what I spent most of my day doing. So that's kind of my broad overview of what is labor trafficking? How do you enforce a claim for labor trafficking? But if anyone else wants to add, go ahead.
And one thing too, for those that we'll be able to answer this and to give it more clarity, within this movement and within larger, it's national, global discussions, there is a focus on sex trafficking, but we're talking about labor trafficking and the difference of, FFC, force, fraud, coercion. You mentioned coercion before, Isabel. What are the requirements when it meets that threshold of FFC when it comes to labor trafficking in particular? Because some folks may not be aware of, for child labor trafficking, that FFC does have to be present, unlike sex trafficking for underage individuals.
Yeah, I think that it's pretty common for there to be some confusion about the differences between sex trafficking and labor trafficking. And I think that this comes from the fact that both offenses are prosecuted through the same statute, through the TVPA. And therefore, there's a lot of similar language in the statute for both types of offenses. However, the primary difference between the two has to do with the facts that are alleged. So to make out a claim for sex trafficking, an individual must allege that their trafficker trafficked them for the purpose of engaging in commercial sex acts. Whereas to make out a claim for labor trafficking, it's really a totality of the circumstances test where you are looking at all of the facts that could make a reasonable person feel as though they were unable to leave the employment. And so you need to allege facts that state that a worker's trafficker used force, fraud, or coercion to obtain their labor or services. And then, as I kind of mentioned before, we don't need to get into all the details of this, but the TVPA is very kind of recursive and quite complicated. And so there's many different subparts and ways that you can hook onto that to bring a claim for labor trafficking.
Thank you. And if anyone else has anything they'd like to add or to include, then definitely please unmute and feel free to share. I briefly mentioned before, we're talking about child labor trafficking or child sex trafficking, or the larger umbrellas of labor and sex trafficking. Karen, if you could kind of tell us a little bit about sort of the intersection between youth and labor trafficking. And this really, I'm going to start with Karen, but then any of the panelists that feel comfortable to share, and why that belongs in this conversation and why we need to talk about child labor trafficking when we're talking about labor trafficking in general.
Yeah, so as Isabel said, there is the phrase for force, fraud, and coercion under labor trafficking, which doesn't exist for minors with sex trafficking. And so it gets really complicated when you have a minor or a youth that has to pay a lot of bills. And they maybe came unaccompanied to this country and they have no other way to pay bills besides working in a way that is not, considered legal by the United States. What we see is a lot of youth are being exploited because they are in such a vulnerable situation where they will be living on the streets if they do not engage in some sort of work. A lot of times this work is exploitative, not necessarily trafficking. A lot of what we see as far as trafficking goes, though, are clients who are not allowed to go to school and instead they're being forced to go to work. Some of them are having to take care of children that are aunts or uncles' children, their cousins or their nieces and nephews, in a way that keeps them from doing what the United States law says they should do, which is going to school. We have seen them have to clean homes. Obviously, a lot of them are not eligible for a work permit, and so that just automatically places them in a higher space for being exploited, whether it actually leads to trafficking or not. There's tons of exploitation within youth and work. And we see it often as far as trafficking goes because like labor laws aren't held up with youth. Youth can get paid whatever the person feels like paying them. And a lot of times the coercion or the fraud is something that like is very appealing to a youth. And so it's something that maybe wouldn't work for an adult, but for a youth, they're holding something in front of the youth that is very exciting or very tempting for them to, go ahead and just leave school and start whatever process this might be. And obviously a lot of those things that they hold in front of the youth then lead into other forms of trafficking, especially sex trafficking. So it's sort of like it's a pathway. Labor trafficking is a pathway for them to get into sex trafficking a lot of times, and we're seeing that happen often. Another piece of it is forced criminality. A lot of these clients that we're seeing are being forced into gangs or forced into other sorts of criminal activities. And I guess the bottom line is that youth are extremely vulnerable. Their brains aren't fully developed. They have probably the least amount of support when they come here to the United States. And so they're one of the most vulnerable populations, especially as immigrants, that there can be. And so that's what we're seeing a lot of right now. And especially as the laws get stricter on work permits and who's able to obtain them, that is just perpetuating even more labor trafficking happening, especially amongst youth.
Thank you, Karen. And my next kind of question, this sort of goes into, we mentioned kind of grooming, vulnerabilities that folks and children may have. Celine, if you could kind of share what does the day-to-day look like or the everyday life look like if you're experiencing this, and what, beyond sort of the exploitation factors or things that we might see in picture, what does that look like for survivors or people who are in active situations?
Yeah, so I know when people hear labor trafficking, they often picture extreme situations. And while these cases do exist, many survivors who we work with don't initially recognize themselves as victims or even identify their situation as exploitation or even trafficking, because what they're living in is their basic needs becoming a tool of control for most of the traffickers. So, and this might present itself as a survivor stating that, oh, I'm living with my employer, they're providing housing, and and it's dependent on the job, meaning if they leave the job, they become hopeless. Housing is a basic need for most people. So staying in the job, even if it's exploitative or even if it violates any labor laws or violations, they're not going to leave because they don't have any other option. The other way it presents itself is survivors living in constant fear every day because they know what they stand to lose if the trafficker or if they act in any way that offends the trafficker. And this can present itself with
Are we
fear.
done with that bag? Can you put it in the trash?
Oh, sorry, folks. Just remember to please mute yourself just while we're listening to the panelists. Thank you.
Mhm. And so living in constant fear can present itself as being threatened with deportation or arrest, where you're told, you're working without a permit or you don't have a license to practice in this field. So if you tell anyone that I'm not paying you how much you're supposed to be paid, I'm gonna report you. So survivors are often kept in environments that are exploitative. And I'll also say this, many survivors are never gonna come up to you and say, oh, I'm being trafficked. They'll often bring it up in conversation and make statements such as, oh, I can't quit because if I quit, then my child is not going to be able to attend the daycare that my employer referred them to so that I could work, 18-hour shift. Or sometimes they'll say, oh, this is how the job is. You have to have a good work ethic. So you don't need breaks. You need to work, 20 hours without interruption and you keep getting shifts. So it appears in subtle forms that, could be everyday normalized activities that when you look into it more are red flags that could potentially indicate that, oh, something's not right. And often labor trafficking occurs on a spectrum where exploitation starts as the employer testing you out to see, oh, are you going to report me for this? Is this a big violation for you? And then eventually it grows and amounts to instances where, as Isabel mentioned, force, fraud, and coercion enter the chat and you're not able to leave because, there's a lot that has mounted or has been placed on you that you're inadvertently unable to or have no choice to do anything other than stay in those situations.
Thank you, Celine. And if I'm going to kind of put that to other panelists too, if they wanted to, share other, add to sort of this question too. Evelyn, I see you unmuted, so.
Yeah, because I know you wanted me to add. No, just to add to what the rest of my panelists said, as Ashton mentioned, I am a survivor of child forced labor from Cameroon to the United States at age 9, in Silver Spring, Maryland. I think, Celine, you work in Silver Spring. And I think also a lot of you mentioned, like, we don't know, that we are we are survivors of trafficking, or when we're in that situation that we're being trafficked. A bit about my situation was, my trafficker is also cultural. So when we are talking about labor trafficking, we also have to think about the cultural component. But not only that, also try to understand that labor trafficking is not only foreigners. I usually say, like, maybe if we give a number, 100%, if 100%, 90% are foreigners, because they don't understand the rules and laws and regulations, right? That's why we need lawyers like Elizabeth and, Isabella, and my organization that I work with. Like, we don't understand that side. Why the other 10% is also, the other 10% are US citizen. But not only that, sometimes I feel like labor trafficking is, if we think of it goes back to like history. Exploitation has always been the issue in this country, of like, people were benefiting from forced labor, and forced labor never ended. There were people that didn't want to end forced labor. I came here with a false promises that my trafficker was going to be like an adopted mother, right, from Cameroon. And also, when we talk about children, when you're talking about children, like, I'm raising a son right now, and sometimes he's like, when I'm crying about funds, he's like, Mommy, I'm going to go get a job. I'm like, boy, just focus on school, right? That vulnerability of also the children wanting to help. For me, my parents were not together, and I live with my uncle, and my uncle worked for a lot of wealthy people from my tribe, right? And one of them was a very wealthy woman that lives in America. So, and I was just fascinated by a lot of the television show that I watch. I know what you guys are gonna say. Yes, Cosby Show. I wanted a Cosby that. We're not gonna talk about that. And Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and 90210. Like, so if someone come to a country, like in Cameroon, I wasn't living, and kids were vulnerable. It's like I wasn't getting the love that I wanted. And so when they say, hey, you're coming to America, I'm like, yes, I'm going to marry Will Smith. I was excited, but never did I think I will come to the United States and be forced to work, knowing the history of forced labor in this country. Slavery was ended in 1865, and then the woman, when we think about youth, when Carolyn, when you're talking about youth, it's also like the fact that people want cheap labor and youths are vulnerable, because the job I was doing, cooking and cleaning, no school. And not only that, she was also beating me up, right? And that threat, I think Selena said, the threat, because I remember my uncle saying, when you go, listen, be a good girl, don't do that. And from where I come from, we have to respect our elders. We got to do whatever they tell us to do and be quiet, right? I was in pain. I was being beaten. I was like, this is not the America that I wanted. And not only that, think about it. She could have paid a nanny a lot of money to take care of her two kids, but she decided to go to her home country to get someone that she thought was, naive and a child, because children, we are vulnerable. We want that love, because as me raising a child, I'm starting to learn the different, so it's really hard when they don't talk about labor trafficking, and labor trafficking also intersect, right? I don't talk about that. And my trafficker had a big business, right? She also embezzled $1.4 million from the US government. And I was working in that business, right? I was taking care of two kids, no school from age 9 until you can say 17. And then I get out. I went to Catholic charity. When I got help, got into foster care, then another exploitation in the foster care system. But I'm glad that we are talking about labor trafficking, and especially when it comes to youth, because I'm very passionate addressing child forced labor, because it happened to me and my education was taken from age 9 until like 18. I still struggle with education right now. And I guess that's all I want to say. And so everything that my fellow panelists said, it just combined to everything that I've been through.
Can I just jump in super quickly and say thank you, Evelyn, so much for that, and for reminding us that the economic system that we have in the United States is based on forced labor, and it continues to be based on forced labor. Like, that is how it works.
Yeah.
So it's very important that we work towards changing that. And then just to kind of pick up on a couple of threads that other folks mentioned, I really want to emphasize for anyone who's in a space where they're screening people for potential trafficking, that it's really important to go through like a full set of questions with folks, because people often are not aware that what is happening to them could be trafficking. And I like to really think about labor trafficking as like a constellation of facts, right? And so you're building this constellation, or, to mix metaphors, you're building a brick wall, like brick by brick. And so by connecting the dots, or like stacking the bricks up on one another, you're able to like help make those connections for folks and get them the help that they need.
And just to add to what you said, Isabel, it also got me thinking. I think Selena mentioned, like, even when I got out of my situation, I still was afraid, right? Because there were also threats. It also depends on your trafficker. We think that it only happens to sex trafficking, that they're a threat. They're a threat with labor trafficking, because we are also brought here by wealthy people and big companies, right? And a lot of us that are children work for big companies. When my situation was out, I always call her my Melanie. She's my favorite lawyer, she just like, honey, what happened to you is wrong. Like, I have scars all over my body, right? Literally taking my clothes, but I was still afraid to go to court to testify. So if you here working with a client, someone, just know that we are afraid, because there are threat that is being made. And sometimes we also feel like the justice does not really fit us, because my trafficker was also released from prison in 2020 and they didn't tell me. And it's funny, because this weekend I attended our tribal stuff and I saw her, and like, I just crawled. My cousin is like, what's going on? I just like froze up, and I was like, I'm going to go home. This is not the environment for me. So if you are working with people, just know that. And we need to do more with the DOJ, because my trafficker was released and it was so unfair that I wasn't notified. And those things really, like, that's why we don't want to come out, especially if we're foreigners. We are afraid of the system as well.
Thank you so much, Evelyn, for sharing. And there's so many things, obviously, to address, to talk about sort of what the system has established in itself in the beginning of our country, and the beginning of this country, and then currently what the system exists and what it's like for people with lived experience and survivors, and how potential trauma and injustice continues to come. And Evelyn, I really appreciated when you're talking about like this idea of what okay, slavery, we say is outlawed. There's a loophole in the 13th Amendment, but like, okay, so we have a civil war, it's done. But there's still so much that we don't know, or so much there's myths, misperceptions about labor trafficking. If you could kind of speak to that, of what is it that we still don't understand? What are some of the most common myths and misunderstandings when it comes to understanding labor trafficking as it currently exists in this country?
Thank you, Ashton. So, I mean, I would say some of the myth and misconception, really a lot, like I said earlier, a lot of time the myths, they think that labor trafficking is only foreigners. Yes, 90% of foreigners, what 10 are U.S. citizens. And it's funny because those U.S. citizens that are labor trafficked are people of color. There are two cases that I can talk about. I'm going to share them, if I'm able to share in the chat, right? So we have one of Chris Smith. This was in 2022, where in South Carolina, African-American man was held into labor trafficking, working in the diner. Then we have another one, which was a child, like Karen said, like a youth. She was a U.S. citizen, right? And was worked in the court, Kendra Ross, So a lot of this myth, I feel like a lot of the times the reason we truly don't want to address labor trafficking because we're all guilty of it. Me, myself, right? The misconception, because we profit off cheap labor import, but I think it's Isabella mentioned, like the trade, the chocolate, all of that, and those are the myth of labor trafficking. Let's look at it that why is it that we can't address trafficking, especially Maryland? I love my Maryland people. I love being in Maryland, but I just feel like Maryland has focused a lot on like sexual exploitation and just forget. But we have so many survivors like myself that was brought yet in Maryland. I even have one survivor that was like in Howard County, right? We don't talk about, there's so much farms in Maryland, right? There's so many wealthy people in Maryland. Why is it that every time when I go to a conference, I don't see a lot of labor trafficking? So shout out to Ashton to like, hey, let's talk about labor trafficking. Because Maryland is guilty of labor trafficking. Like we are guilty and we're enabling that. And also not only that, we just always just say, oh, it's only foreigners. Yes, 90% is foreigner. I'm putting some of the cases online, but we really have to start looking like, hey, U.S. citizens are impacted. And it's also racism, right? Because just goes back to like, hey, forced labor, if we look at history, nobody wanted to there were some people, there were abolitionists, there were people that did not, especially in the South, they did not want to end forced labor. They did not want to end slavery because they were benefiting from slavery. And now we have reversed it that everybody, especially the Hispanic community, are being forced to work in certain places, certain conditions, in the country. And we don't want to talk about it. Why? Because we are guilty of it. But the myth to your question, Ashton, is that, a lot of the times, yes, it is foreigner. I'm a foreigner, but we also have to think about U.S. citizens. And a lot of those U.S. citizens are people of color, African Americans, and maybe that's why we turn a blind side.
Thank you, Evelyn. And this kind of blends great into sort of this next topic, which it is about immigration, or how labor trafficking is often framed as just an immigration issue. But we know that a major driver or a real driver is vulnerability, dehumanization of people, of groups of people, of communities. So with Celine, with your experience that you've seen, what vulnerabilities may you typically see, or that you might see most often? And what do we overlook when we're talking about kind of the question about citizenship status? And I know, Evelyn, you did speak a lot, to this, that who is impacted, but who also is impacted here, that it's not just foreign nationals. But if you could speak to those kind of vulnerabilities, what are you seeing? And then also going to absolutely open this up to the panel too for the survivors and clients that they serve as well.
Yeah, I think Evelyn already mentioned this, but one of the biggest misconceptions about labor trafficking is that it's primarily an immigrant issue or an immigration issue. And I agree, like while immigration can absolutely increase someone's risk and vulnerabilities to being trafficked, it's important to recognize that the vulnerability itself, being immigration and not their citizenship status, is what traffickers exploit. So in my work as a case manager, like I rarely meet people whose only vulnerability is immigration status. Most often, people have an intersection of multiple challenges that they're experiencing in their everyday life that make them more susceptible to being trafficked. So most of the time, we see individuals who are experiencing housing instability, financial hardships, social isolation, language barriers, which is a big one, prior trauma, such as, adverse childhood experiences that impact how they interact with society and daily activities, and also limited support systems in society, or even lack of knowledge about, workplace rights, as Evelyn had mentioned. Those are things that traffickers exploit. Other times, it's more communal or societal factors, such as fleeing violence or, trying to support your family. And I think the most basic thing that we forget is that people are just trying to survive. And the wanting to survive is a vulnerability that most traffickers exploit because they always have a third sense for people who are vulnerable. They know exactly what it is that you need and they're going to give it to you. If it's emotional support, they'll get in a relationship with you. If it's housing, they'll offer housing and a job. If it's financial support, they'll give you gifts and they'll offer you quick schemes, make money fast, get rich quickly so that, you can support your family, you can do all these things. So in most cases, if someone is facing eviction or homelessness, they may feel that they don't have any other choice. And the lack of choice or the desperation that they want is something that the trafficker will take advantage of. And they'll offer it as, oh, if you come work for me, I'll give you housing. And, I can open a bank account for you, but it would have to be in your name. But I'll control it, because you don't know how this thing works. And then eventually I'll teach you. So there's a vulnerability and then there's opportunity. And traffickers just need those two things to exploit pretty much anyone. And if you are trying to think about how we can look at this objectively, we could use like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And most of the clients that I interact with, you'll find they don't have housing, they don't have jobs, they don't have, well, they pretty much have all the vulnerabilities that traffickers would need to exploit. And when you tell them, oh, I could connect you with an attorney, and this could solve pretty much all of the problems that you have, and the client will outright tell me, no, I don't want any of those things. I just want a bed for tonight and I want food. All those other things you're telling me, I don't have an interest. So what they need right now is reassurance, safety, and food. Addressing those basic needs 100% often reduces the risk of re-victimization and of traffickers exploiting the same loopholes that they've used before. I think another important thing to remember in this environment of migration and smuggling and trafficking, people often conflate them, but I like to tell people trafficking could happen in the same household. You never have to leave your door. You could get trafficked by people in your household. You don't have to get on a plane and fly to another country. You don't even have to drive or even walk to your neighbor's house. Trafficking could happen in your environment if these elements of fraud, force, or coercion. And it doesn't even have to be physical. If the mental fear is there, or like the perceived fear that if I don't do what they're telling me to do, then these things will happen to me, you're definitely in a vulnerable position for people to take advantage of you. And an example like I like to give people is when we were younger, I think it's a myth, but I'm really not sure, is that if an owl like would come and perch at your house, then you would have bad luck for the coming 2 years. And most of the time, there was no correlation. Bad luck would fall on people whenever there was an owl and it would cry the whole night. And in my situation, if a trafficker would have brought an owl to my house and like thrown rocks at it and it would cry, I would have done anything they wanted me to do to get away from that situation. So cultural components and other vulnerabilities that aren't common to people, with them looking at them, are things that could definitely impact survivors or victims who are often trafficked. So immigration status is a vulnerability, not necessarily a cause of trafficking. And yeah, anyone else who wants to join can join.
Yeah, anyone else in the panel? Sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ricardo.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say where we're seeing a lot of particular vulnerability right now is through social media. The youth are so accessible, especially through TikTok and Instagram. That's where we've seen women be taken away from their home by a trafficker with their child, because as Celine said, they're just able to offer them anything that is their basic needs. And so once they're hooked in, and those people are very smart, they know how to then delete their account and delete all history, and you can never find them again. And so we're finding especially vulnerable teens that really don't know how to use computers or anything. They don't know how life works really, especially not here in the United States if they're recently arrived. And so there are traffickers that are so smart at getting onto their accounts and watching their stories, and stories tell a lot about these youth. I don't know if you guys ever watch like their WhatsApp stories or anything, but they tell a lot about vulnerabilities. And so these traffickers are just right there on top of it. And they're working in these networks that are so complex, but like that work so well. Like they're very well-oiled machines, and like it's just like targeting these youth, especially these young women. If they already have a child, like they're especially more vulnerable because they have someone else that they're looking out for besides themselves. And we're seeing a lot of instances of teen and young 20s women in our program that we run that have babies. And so that is like just increasing and compounding the amount of vulnerabilities that we're seeing, especially in that age group.
Yeah, I just want to share an example that we are seeing in Maryland. We had been in touch with international recruited migrant workers who come to Maryland with a work visa and a promise of a particular job, but end up performing labor that is totally different from they were promised, and find themselves experiencing many workplace abuse, including long work days without rest, low paid or wage theft, passport and personal documents withholding. And there are the workplace conditions that work face in addition to threats and intimidation from their employer. And for us, it's very important to mention that temporary visa programs can create particular vulnerabilities when a worker ability to remain employed depends on a single employer, because if you come here to work with this type of visa, you only can work with one single employer, especially when that employer controls housing, transportation, or even access to information. I just want to echo that we cannot assume that legal status alone protects workers from exploitation. And the most sad thing that we are seeing right now is even we document these abuses. Right now, this federal government is trying to expand aggressively this visa program. And this is not only in Maryland, this is a national problem that we are seeing. So, for example, in the past 15 years, we are seeing that H-2A program that is specific for farm workers. The expansion, it's at least 40% more in Maryland. And this is kind of 2.5 nationally expansion. So my point of this is we are seeing that the government is trying to expand this program, but we are seeing that this is a program that you can face so many abuse and so many trafficking situations. So this is very concerning. But also, I'm so happy that governments like here in Maryland that we have this conversation and we are trying to do better laws. That's a great step, but there is so many things that we can do to make sure that everyone, doesn't matter if you are here with a visa or without visa, have the same rights.
Can I add to something that when Ricardo was speaking, it came to my mind regarding like the myth and of course the immigration status. Like another myth and misconception, I'm just gonna use one of the Harriet Tubman fellows. He don't mind. His name is Anthony Paco. So Anthony, because another myth is like, of course, yes, women we are vulnerable, but men are also vulnerable, right? But this is also this myth that if a man, especially a man like my amazing Harry Tubman fellow Anthony Paco, that if you're part of the LGBTQ plus, it automatically means that you were sexually exploited into trafficking, right? No. Anthony is a man. He ran away from Peru, just like you're talking about, Ricardo, like the visa and things like that. He ran away from Peru to come to the United States because he's a gay male and his parents were trying to put him into conversion therapy, right? So he ran away because of that. And I think, Celine, you mentioned people flee and leave and come and become vulnerable to this country. So he got a visa to come and work in the diner, but instead was being exploited, right? Was forced to work. So another myth is sometimes we just focus on one type of trafficking, or we also focus on just the kind of people that are being trafficked. We don't think about the LGBTQ plus, that there are a lot of them too that are into that were also forced into forced labor. And Ricardo, when you were talking about immigration, it just like brought it, because for me, I got a T visa, right? Like when they're trying to blame, what they're trying to do right now is just blame immigration on everything, like immigrants, this, but they don't understand that we are being exploited in this country. We are forced in this country. I came here because I wanted to marry Will Smith. I didn't know that I needed a visa to stay here or working permit or to go to school, right? I didn't know none of that. So why you getting mad at me? So but last year we went on the Hill to try, me and my colleagues, we went on the Hill to talk about like the T visa, and her name was Andrea Lovin in the judiciary. She basically say all the visas are fraud, everything, including the T visa. And she was looking at me and my other colleague that is from Congo. Like, I never felt so dehumanized. So it's like when you see us, when we talk about vulnerability right now, it is even harder for us, especially for someone like me that have been in this work for such a long time, and to see what this administration is doing and to blame it on immigrant, and to also know that a T visa is a lifeline for a lot of us, because with my T visa, I was able to do so much. And so when we are doing this work and when you're working with people like me that require those type of things, we really have to really try to dig more into the policy and see how we can combat that. So I just wanted to add that.
No, thank you for sharing, Evelyn. I think I can speak for everyone that there's some rage with given in solidarity of anger of how you're treated. I'm sorry that that happened to you, to your colleague, and to survivors. For those, I mean, this is unfortunately a very consistent and strong pattern in this country of forcibly bringing people from different countries, forced immigration, forced migration, and then blaming them. I mean, whether, in many different, races, times of history, different parts of, expansion in our country, that it was always blamed on immigrants when they were asked or forced to come. So unfortunately, that's not new. Sorry, I apologize if you hear my dog. So he's upset too. So Oso is in solidarity and enraged with you, Evelyn. So he's with you as an ally. So I think, there's so much, thanks, Mac. Yeah. So, I mean, there's so much that we could kind of talk about and say, and I want to make sure we have time for the Q&A. But really, we're talking about what survivors need, what people have lived experience, what they're going through, what current and active victims and situations, what is it that, community members can do to support migrant workers, to also assist with, assisting with an exit or providing accessibility for survivors to exit their situation, maybe outside of a system. So, Karen, I don't know if, kind of putting that to you, I know that's sort of a big question, but, what is it that community members, folks that are listening here, what are some kind of easy, I mean, I'm not, I say easy, but a lot of this obviously is always not easy, but what are things that we can do and we can kind of leave with, or partake in, be a part of this work, and what we can maybe tell other people in our network to do, sort of actionable steps. I'm going to start rambling a little bit, but yeah, so, and this is, Karen, if you want to start us off in the opening to the panel.
Sure. I was discussing this with our trafficking director earlier today, and we said, like, this is a really difficult question because there are resources out there, but it's really hard these days to detect labor trafficking. And so you're not going to be able to just walk down the street and see a bunch of Hispanic men on a roof and go, oh yeah, that's labor trafficking right there. And so it's really hard to detect. And you also you don't want to look at a certain situation and just because you don't want to stereotype. And so it's really difficult. And so obviously you have the human trafficking hotline. Some places I think the police might still be trustworthy. I wouldn't say everywhere that they're trustworthy, and immigrants are often not going to go to police because of the conflation in between police and ICE and all of that. And so, maybe the Department of Labor, but I do think community members going to presentations like this, learning what trafficking is, I think is really important. Getting to know other people's stories is really important. I think we see a lot of Hollywood movies that makes trafficking look a certain way, and I think it really might do more of a disservice than a service to trafficking. I think on the one hand, maybe it's good that it's out, but on the other hand, it makes people think trafficking is only this one certain thing, and it's really not what is depicted a lot of times in movies. And so I think learning what trafficking is, learning what it can look like, knowing the resources in your area, it's really hard for individuals to sort of, I think, intervene in trafficking. I do think you need to have a network of community organizations, lawyers, obviously the National Human Trafficking Hotline. You need people like this group that is on this call to be able to turn to, because it is something that as an individual, just maybe walking down the street, I live in Baltimore City, you're not going to be able to just pinpoint that trafficking is happening. And so going to those people who are experts, not that you can't learn more yourself, but going to people who are experts, I think is really important in doing this work. And then what we do here at AWE is we provide programming for trafficking survivors specifically. And so we're providing them community and enrichment activities and ways to get out of the trafficking situation and then rebuild their lives. And so I think providing them safe places to land that are able to provide for not only, like Celine said, the Maslow's hierarchy. Yes, we provide them food. Yes, we provide them shelter, but we're also then able to dig deeper into the vulnerabilities of why did you end up in this trafficking situation? And so we're working on mental health and them forming community amongst each other and within the greater community where they live. And so I think even people volunteering in places with wherever they live, volunteering with organizations that assist with trafficking survivors if they're able to, I think is also a really good way to get involved in trafficking in the positive sense, get involved in trafficking and combating it.
Thank you, Karen. That actually you kind of answers from this next question that I'd love to go to the panel. And Evelyn, we can start with you to talk about your organization, sort of what sort of resources they offer, and how to potentially get involved if there's opportunities for folks to get involved, if it is volunteer or additional ways to support, and as well, Evelyn, for you to talk about the Harriet Tubman Fellowship that you started as well.
All right, thank you. And so I do appreciate that I would have said the hotline as well, but I've been talking to survivors. I know I hosted a town hall meeting last year where it was only survivor-based community, and a lot of them right now do not want to utilize the hotline because it has been moved from Polaris, and a lot of survivors really work hard to work with Polaris. So we don't want to use the hotline, right? Because we we try to call the hotline, and we feel like it's a tactic to try to get immigrants right now. That was one. I would say, Caroline, the best way you said it, like I could reach out to someone like you. I could reach out to all of my fellow panelists to say, hey, I need help. And in the Human Trafficking Legal Center, we work with law firms to connect our clients to pro bono services. I think Isabella mentioned, like, we need legal representation, right? We can't afford lawyers, right? And when we get out, we need someone that can teach us our rights. So the Human Trafficking Legal Center, not only do we have like the services to help them get like their TVs or immigration, we also have the litigation, component of it, like civic litigation, but we don't use import ban no more because, the Tariff Act, we said import ban, right? We don't use the word tariff because, when that man came and started saying tariff, so everybody got scared. So we don't use the word tariff. So my amazing colleague, Anna Suyasama, we use the word import ban. We also try to work with big companies and CBP to just try to address like the supply chains, train them. We train other, organization on the importance of legal representation. But one thing we do really do well is just really connect our clients to legal representation. And we also help. I always tell Martina, like, we should name her grandchild Mel, because every time she get a mail and it's like a T visa, a person, one of our clients get a T visa, she gets super excited and we celebrate. But not only that, we have the survivor leadership program, which I run. We help, we talk about in the survivor leadership, we also do like a Know Your Rights webinar, right? September 16th, we're going to have our fourth Know Your Rights to understand the U.S. housing system, right? We talk about issues that affects us and how lawyers can really help us to utilize this. We did one on understanding the U.S. immigration system, understanding the U.S. tax system, understanding, how you can get a will instead, because we've lost a lot of survivors in this field. When we are talking about vulnerability, when we are out of the situation, it goes beyond, legal representation. It goes beyond just like, okay, you got your paper, you're good, but you're still being re-exploited, right? You're still not getting paid. And that's when, I created the program called the Harriet Tubman Fellowship, and this was something I tried to do 10 years ago when I worked at the law firm of Baker McKenzie. Ashton, I got to update my bio. Sorry, I sent you the wrong bio. But,
no worries.
The Harriet Tubman Fellowship, it's a program that really focuses on labor trafficking. I know I've been getting some backlashes, or why is it only labor trafficking survivors? It's because that, like there's so many programs, but the truth is a lot of survivors of sexual exploitation, they utilize those programs faster than labor trafficking survivors. So I wanted a program because I was thinking of myself. If there was a program like Harriet Tubman Fellowship, I'll be the president of my country, which I don't want to be anymore. I changed my mind. But with the fellowship, we help each fellow with $10,000 a year. We give them a choice, because a lot of times we were not given choice. We were not taking, we don't give it. So tell us what you want to do and we invest in you. But not only that, a lot of times we want trafficking survivors to come and share their story, speak, but they're not ready, right? I mean, I love me some Obama, but I know Obama got some speech training that he took and stuff like that. He's a great speaker, but you need to also help us to like, hey, how do I put my message across? So we do an advocacy week, which we bring the fellows to DC. We also have them meet with different partners that are addressing human trafficking. But with the fellowship, we also give them a $500 monthly stipend. I always tell the fellows, like, you can use that. You want to go to Alabama, you can do whatever you want to do. You want to go to the Bahamas, that's on you. But the only thing that we look for is that 10,000, so it's a total of 20,000 per year, right? And we just had where Ashley, you met the first cohort, which was 7. We launched it in 2024. We had 84 applicants. We had 7 amazing fellows. They are now alumni, and this year, due to funding, because things are hard, but I'm still able to raise enough money to have 5 fellows. And that 5 goes back to say there's even a U.S. citizen that was a labor trafficking survivor and is American, right? But African American. So we still were able to have 5. So we have our second cohort, which they're amazing. You guys can check them on our website. I think Daniela or Mark put it in there. But There's so much I can talk about the fellowship, but I know the fellowship has been very rewarding. The 712 of them got their degree. One of them graduated from American University thanks to the scholarship that they got, and they're so happy. And they also spoke at the UN. But if you want to learn more about the program, please go to our website. And if you know of any trafficking survivor of labor trafficking survivor, hopefully in 2028, I'll be able to launch a third one if I can get some money, because now people that was getting federal funding, they're competing with private funding. So I'm just praying I continue to get money to support, because it is really a good program and it's really to focus on labor trafficking, because we were exploited. So much was taken away from us. And now we're out here, we are doing work that we are being re-exploited. So why would not give us a chance to do something that we dreamed of, what we wanted to be before we became survivors of trafficking? So thank you. Sorry, I know that was a long.
No apologies. Thank you so much for sharing. And I think it's incredible the work that you've personally done and that your agency has done to help to support. And I think we need more of that joy in this space, and the success moments, the times where survivors are able to do incredible things to accomplish, that they're able to really be celebrated for their success, and that this story isn't just what only defines them, that we're able to know that things that are working for them and that are working to support them. So no, I could listen to those stories all day. And so I want to be sensitive for time, but I still, again, want to make sure everyone answers this question too, just in terms of the resources that your organization does, and then how maybe to reach out and get involved. And we'll have, again, Danielle and Mac are incredible with, they're so quick for the chat monitors to put y'all's agency's information. And again, we'll share resources. But Celine, if you're able to answer them too, just about what what kind of services you guys offer, and then maybe how to get in touch, or if there's volunteer opportunities or ways to support.
Yeah, so I can speak for the anti-trafficking program. So we provide wraparound case management services for US national and foreign-born nationals. So anyone in DC metropolitan area, that's Maryland, Virginia, or Northern Virginia and all of DC, you can reach out and we can support. We also have a victims of crime program. So if you have anyone who's ever been a victim of crime living in Maryland or experienced a crime in Maryland, and I think maybe lives in DC or Virginia, I'll ask my supervisor about that. You can send them to us. They could get help. And if you have any clients who are or are eligible or have a certification letter or a T visa recently certified, and you're not sure how you could help them out or help them apply for public benefits or TANF and stuff like that, the IRC could help with that. And then the IRC also has other programs. You can go to our website or email me. My email is my first name, last name @rescue.org. And we also provide training and technical assistance. So if you want us to come speak to a group of survivors, teachers, social groups, pretty much anyone on identifying how to help people, pretty much anything related to trafficking, we also do that for free. So you could just, email us and then we'll come out and speak to you. And yeah, I'm guessing that's it.
Thank you, Celine. Isabella, Ricardo, if you guys wants to, if I can tag team it, or wants to go for Presidio. Thank you,
Yeah,
Celine.
I can start, and Isabel, please jump. I think we provide Know Your Rights sessions, and because we have also offices in Mexico, we provide these sessions before workers came to US. So we try to, at least they know the rights and they know that we are here to support them if they face any situation. As already Isabel shared, also we have an intake line where we can provide any legal representation, or we answer any questions. People call us, for example, hey, I don't know where I can go to the doctor. We can provide all these resources to the workers, to the people, and I think we welcome volunteers to help us with various aspects of our work, including outreach. I think also one piece of our work is advocacy, and right now we are trying to do more advocacy at the local level. So it will be great if you can join us and you can call your representatives to ask for better protection, because this session we try to push a law, but unfortunately, we don't have the enough support, but we are trying to do it next session. Also, we are trying to advocate in the federal level because, as I mentioned, we are seeing so many people, even people from our state, from Maryland, trying to expand or try to support these biggest companies to bring more people with seasonal visa, with temporary visa. So Isabel, I'm not sure you want to add something else?
Yeah, that was great. I would just also add that CDM has a lot of like digital resources as well that are, on our website and you can find easily if you are looking for help on like how to advise people or how to help people with questions that you might not know the answer to. We have a blog where we post kind of know your rights information on the blog, and then we also have a web page which is functionally Yelp for temporary workers, where folks who are coming to the US to work on temporary visas can share their experiences and review employers. And just in my short time here at CDM, I have seen how valuable and useful that is, because if you get a call from someone on intake and they say, hey, this person is asking me for $10,000 as a recruitment fee. Like, do you think this is fraud? And I'll say, well, probably it's fraud, don't pay them. But then we can also go and look and see, like, has anybody else reported that this employer is fraudulent or is trafficking folks? So yeah, so I would encourage folks to also engage with our online resources.
It's an
Sorry,
incredible tool and website. I just want to say it's incredible. Please check it out. Sorry, Evelyn, what were you going to say?
No, sorry. I forgot to also act like when we're also advocating right now on like the importance of a T visa. As most of you know, like the T visa wait is very long, and so that's also one of the things my organization is doing, like really trying to push this administration to start focusing on T visa and why T visa is so important. So that's also one of the advocacy that we are doing.
Thank you, Evelyn. And Karen, I know that you shared kind of the beginning about sort of some of the services that your agency does, but if there's anything else that you wanted to plug in before we can go to the Q&A portion that you want to add.
Sure. Yes, we have our youth program, which is for ages 15 to 25 Spanish-speaking immigrant trafficking survivors. So that's an enrichment program. It's wraparound services. We provide pretty much everything you could think of for those clients. And there's no like attendance requirement. They could come in at 15, they could be around for a year, they could leave again, they could come back 2 years later. And so that's sort of a very flexible program that we offer. We also facilitate the TVAP and Aspire programs under USCRI. So if you do know of anyone, they don't have to already have had their eligibility letter. We can apply for them to receive their eligibility letter. But if you do know that they're a trafficking survivor and need like intensive case management services, like I said, we do offer almost everything here in-house, including legal, medical, housing, food, clothing, like pretty much everything we can offer here. And so if they do need intensive case management and live in the Baltimore City or Baltimore County areas, you can refer them to us on our website. And TVAP and Aspire is any age, and any immigrant, not just Spanish speaking. Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you. No, thank you so much. So we're going to, we're closing out this panel. I know we could probably talk for another hour and a half. I know that I have my own questions and things. So I really want to thank each and every one of y'all for sharing your expertise, what your agency does, from your own personal experience and stories, from how you support survivors, how to get involved, what your agency is doing, and how we can, be better in this space, and also to show up and to support survivors and to prevent exploitation, to prevent violence, to prevent labor trafficking. Now I'm going to hand it over we're going to open the floor for the questions from our audience and from our attendees.